Hello everyone and welcome to a GamePad panel. My name is Nigel. I'm the co-founder of mayamada and organizer of the GamePad online event. And I'm here with some talented video game professionals discussing even important topics in video games. So as you know we do with GamePad, we talk to video game professionals to get an idea of their journey, how they got to where they are and the kind of work that they do. We also want to give some insight into the future of the industry and the culture in general for those who are interested in being a part of it, and just generally to get you thinking about video games, how they're made. So before we dive into the panel topic for today, let me introduce the other boxes that I have here. So I have no idea what order you are all in as people are watching, but on my list, I've got first GAMINGbible journalist Imogen Mellor. Welcome, Imogen.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. I was surprised I was first. I thought it was Annie first for me.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
should have matched that up with with the boxes. So we're going in like a random order. So I think next, Quang, founder of the indie studio Asobi.tech, Quang Nguyen. I think he's to my right. Where are you in this thing?
On my screen, I'm in the bottom right in my screen.
Okay. All right. Cool.
So,
I think it is matching up. Then that means in the top left we have creative director at Perpetual Games, Annie Grudeva. Annie, welcome.
Hi, I'm still getting used to hearing that imposter syndrome is not a merciful master.
Oh wow, we could have a whole panel about that. I could, yeah, boy. But you are definitely creative director and well earned, I'm sure. Yeah. So we've settled that. For everyone watching us live, you can let us know what you think in the stream chat. You can also join the GamePad Discord to continue the discussion we're about to have and all the other discussions we're having today. As always, you can always shout at us on social media. We are at mayamada on Twitter and at mayamadatees on Instagram. So we're going to get into the first part of this 3-part discussion panel. The first 2 parts are going to be as part of this live stream, and then the final part will be put together as an extended version after the event. So for part 1, we're going to talk about the general discussion. I should probably introduce that first, is game design. Are games too big to fail? ? And that question mark is important because that's what we're going to explore today. So what we want to talk about is this idea of video games being pretty big right now, but are they too big? How big does a game need to be considered next gen now that we are in a new generation of consoles? And importantly, how do we manage expectations from a game developer perspective and a media and fan perspective to ensure smoother game launches all around? So I want to first talk about how we got here. And spoiler alert, we're going to talk about Cyberpunk. So this was, if you're thinking like, is this because of Cyberpunk? Yes, it is. But we're going to talk about Cyberpunk a bit. We're going to use that as a launch pad to the wider discussion. So I'm going to set a bit of context for everyone, go into the history of some open world games and AAA games as well. After seeing the release of Cyberpunk, it got me thinking about open world games and their appeal, because right now it seems like nearly every AAA game you see is set within an open world, and we've come to expect that. So to think about an open world game, you kind of think about freedom. So that sense that within the game, you can go wherever you want, you can do anything at any time and just move freely through the space that the developer and designers have set before you. So this all started in the 80s with games like Elite, the influential role-playing game Ultima, and then we see Nintendo enter the space with The Legend of Zelda, which let you complete objectives in any order and freely explore the game world. Over in the less family-friendly arena, we have Grand Theft Auto. So some of you watching this right now might not know that GTA started in 2D space. I probably just blew a few minds over there. I'll just give you a moment. But yeah, it started in 2D in the 90s. It eventually moved to 3D. and other games like that were inspired by it, like Urban Chaos, which I remember playing on PC, and Driver. So by the late 1990s, you have this idea of video games really getting very ambitious and approaching the type of ambition seen in Hollywood. So into the new millennia, we have Shenmue and GTA 3, which was the first 3D GTA made by DMA, who were then renamed Rockstar North, and the rest is history, so they say. Then that followed with Vice City, San Andreas. So because of the success of GTA, both financially and critically, it kind of dictated the design of games that followed. So people might remember Mafia and The Getaway, and then it just went crazy with games like Saints Row, Crackdown, and Just Cause, which took the open world thing into a whole nother realm of just insanity. So today we see games like Morrowind, then Skyrim, Fallout series, even Assassin's Creed, which started off fairly open world, has just gone complete open world. And let's not forget Minecraft, because I feel if I do, there'll be angry people at me, which is a relatively new game, but in a sense a throwback to the old days of open world games, so something that is completely open-ended with no storyline or even missions. So that's a bit of the context, and I wanted to start with Annie. And as you are a creative director and someone involved in the design of games and managing a team to make games, what do you think is the appeal of open world games from a games designer perspective?
This is actually quite sweet if you think about it. The open world games, actually the very first ones that all of us played were, outside of our houses, on the street with a bunch of friends, coming up with our own adventures. So there is like something about open world that very much appeals to, like the child in all of us, and the sense of freedom that you can, create your own adventure. So it's a very human appeal that open world games have. It's also like for game designers as well, because like most game designers are very playful people in nature. There is this, drive to give people like not just one way to have fun, but to give people almost like give them toys and let people create their own fun, because like my idea for fun might be very different to someone else's, but you can see that like you can give two different like cubes to the kids, they'll come up with completely different games. So there is like just something very, very human about open world games that has like charmed game designers even before video games were a thing. If you look back historically, there was like those own adventure books that you can open at different pages, and so many other like formats that have existed like long before video games, that of course like that drive and want will transfer to video games. So it's very, very human as a format, really.
I never thought of that. You went like low tech on that, but that's a good, I never thought of that, like just naturally wanting to go out and explore and bringing that into a games world. Does anyone have any kind of highlights in terms of open world games or lowlights? Like what kind of favorite open world games for you?
For me, Skyrim was sort of the big game. So, I mean, Skyrim came out in 2011, I think. Was it 2011, something like that?
Yes,
and so
he says, checking his notes.
Skyrim it came out when I was early teens. And it was sort of the game that I put a lot of hours in, and it expanded my mind in terms of what can be possible in the game. It really, I credit that and a few other games to challenge me down into wanting to be in games as a career, because with Skyrim it was I could have a conversation and I could go anywhere, and spoilers if you've not played Skyrim, at the very beginning you basically escape a dragon and they just say, okay, well, I'm just going to go this way, you meet me there when you can, and you're literally just dropped in the map, and there's just each way you look there are fields and trees and animals, and you could just do anything you want to. And that was the first time I really my mind expanded to, oh my gosh, this is a game, I can do any of this. But I realized that a lot of people don't like Skyrim. It is janky, it is a little bit older now, And a lot of people think that Oblivion, Morrowind were better games, but Skyrim has a special place in my heart.
Okay. How about you, Quang?
I think the first experience of an open world game would be something like SimCity. Building your own city in any way you wanted. You had some money to build your city. You decided where to put the houses, where to put the factories. I think that's like 1989 or something like that. So that's going way back. But as a programmer, the open world for me is making games now. That's the game for me. I make games. So having a programming language to make games in, I get to build whatever I want. And that's the true, that's like the purest form of an open world. I can build it however I want to.
Yeah.
But I think, and he's correct in saying when we were kids, we would go out and play, and we made our own worlds in our minds with our friends, with what we had around them, and that's a wonderful analogy of open world. That's great.
One that stands out for me, I did mention the original GTA. I have enjoyed the GTA series, but I always remember the first GTA for the game that made me make the worst video game prediction ever. Because I remember saying very clearly the move from 2D to 3D would not work. And why would they do this? I was so adamant. I was like, you made two really good games in 2D. What are you doing? And I could not be more wrong. So I enjoyed that game, but also always remember like that terrible, terrible prediction for an open world game.
To be honest, like back then, in the early 90s, late 2000s, the transition from 2D to 3D was terrible. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
So many great franchises that were 2D, moving to 3D was a really bad move for them. But you're right, GTA did it well.
It seemed like a sensible thing to say at the time. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Pac-Man, stay in your lane. Don't go 3D. Stop.
I genuinely think it was the soundtrack that made it for me in GTA 3. It was just perfect.
Yeah. I would agree with that. They've always had like great soundtracks. So we are going to go to the Cyberpunk portion of this panel. And like I said, we're going to talk about the game as a jumping off for different aspects of the discussion over this panel. So I think by now we kind of are aware that Cyberpunk 2077, after much hype, had a rocky launch, to say the least. It was so rocky that it made mainstream news, which is always it's usually a good sign. In this case, I think it's a sign of how bad things got when you see the BBC kind of taking their shots as well. So it came out after, I think, 7-8 years of development. It was riddled with bugs, which in itself is not unusual for open world games. And I think the key thing is that it had little resemblance to what had been promised by developers and even some reviewers who had seen early versions of the game. So it got so bad, CD Projekt Red were forced to offer refunds. I think the game was pulled from the PlayStation store. And I saw a story that mentioned in Bloomberg that a developer mentioned that developing the game was like trying to drive a train while the tracks were being laid in front of you at the same time, and that staff were actually expecting the game to be ready by 2022. So that kind of, set the stage. So yeah, to the point of this panel, then we have this like massive promise, and that set the expectation of this game that's going to move the genre forward, especially considering the previous game from CD Projekt Red, The Witcher 3, which had, all the acclaim deservedly. So Imogen, you've been on our podcast before, and I know you have praised The Witcher. So having played The Witcher, enjoyed it, what were your expectations for Cyberpunk?
Ooh. So I played The Witcher not that long before I played Cyberpunk, or before Cyberpunk came out, sorry. I was sort of late on that one, and I played The Witcher 3 in 2020, which is a little after release, when a lot of stuff all the DLC had been released and people knew the game, and I'd all been told this game was fantastic. Sort of didn't believe it, played it myself, and it's one of my favorite games now. It's phenomenal. I adore the game. I love the storytelling. I love the characters. I love the world. If we talk about games being too big, I think it doesn't do that at all. Every little area that you like touch in The Witcher seems to have a little bit of essence, like a little bit of story, a little bit of something to do, that I think that other open world games have lost. I think so. My expectations for Cyberpunk were sort of minimal, actually, on the basis that
you didn't see
as
Keanu
you
Reeves
say,
then, obviously.
you mentioned, right, that it was 7-8 years of development, but it wasn't really 7-8 years of development. What people thought was 7-8 years of constant development and like a big team working on it was actually like less years than that, and it had a pre-production team working on it, sort of like a small team working on it for a couple of those years at least, and it made and stuff like that. They were working on this for almost 10 years mentality, and then this is what came out, misdirects what people expected of it. And so as someone who's working on the journalist side, that was stuff that we had to like take into consideration in terms of our expectations of what was coming out versus what people were saying, like, oh, it's been almost 10 years. Wow, this is going to be like 10 years of like heavy work going into this game. It wasn't that. There was, the expectations people had. It was a bit like the is it No Man's Sky situation all over again. It was exactly like watching that. I was still, oh gosh, when did No Man's Sky come out? I wasn't in games when No Man's Sky came out. I just watched that from afar,
from a safe distance,
from a safe distance away. Wasn't using Twitter. Great, but the expectations for my expectations personally were like, this game could be fantastic, but I get the No Man's Sky feeling. This scares me. People's expectation of this are so high. I don't think that a game that was supposed to be developed for Xbox One and PS4 is going to look like this. There is no way it can look like this with the trailers, and it's no way that it has all of this potential packed into it in the time that it's actually been developed in. There is no way. And glad to say I was absolutely correct on that one.
So how did you feel about the messaging of that? Like, because you were saying that you, in what you saw, didn't match with like what you might have felt they could actually deliver. So I guess you did see some warning signs.
I think I know some developers who were worried as well, and so that really sort of like turned me on to the fact that this is like, I'm a little bit worried, because other developers were like, I don't know how they're going to pull this off. Who'd been working professionally for years, and they were like, I don't like, they could do this, but it doesn't. The delays, what's going on, and rumors from what we hear. Scary. It's scary to think that this might not be the game that it's supposed to be. And the thing is that it's not just the messaging that CDPR put out, it's also what people picked up on. And so someone can say, oh, well, you're going to really enjoy the story, and then someone hears that and it sort of like echoes and gets bigger of, this game is going to be the best. Like, the story is going to be better than The Witcher 3, and like you whisper something and it amplifies every time it goes from outlet to outlet, Twitter to Facebook, Facebook to people's ears, people telling each other like, oh, I hear it's going to be, and it's like it's this echo effect that was really impact. I mean people didn't expect The Witcher 3 to be as phenomenal as it was, I don't think, from what I hear. Like, The Witcher 3 just like was sort of a shock in just how phenomenal it was. And then that shock of, oh my gosh, this is so phenomenal, also helped amplify. It was like a megaphone of expectations.
Because surely they can do it again.
Yeah, surely they can shock us all with how good this is going to be again. And no,
well,
not really.
So, Annie, you've played it. Tell us what you played it on first, because I think the people need to know.
Why are you making me say that in public? I played it on Stadia.
So we found the one person who has played it on Stadia. But to be fair, so when all this was happening, all the fallout was happening, one of the threads that I did hear is that it runs okay on Stadia of all the platforms. So what was your experience of playing the game?
Yeah, that wasn't me. For me, it was, there was something very cool about starting the game on my PC and then going to bed and just continuing playing it in bed on my phone, like that was cool, and I can't, I can't deny that. I had a lot of issues, especially since my internet connection is not great. So I had very severe issues with lag in particular, and that's when I decided to get a refund on the game and wait until 2022 for like a stable PC build. But honestly, yeah, if the Stadia thing actually works, it's really, really fun. So I can't say anything bad about it.
Okay. So like for the sort of game makers here, so Annie and Quang, one of the things that I'm sort of aware of, like I used to be a software engineer, not in games, but I kind of have some understanding of the process. And one of the things I know that happens is this idea of feature creep, especially for a game, even if not in constant sort of single state like development for the whole of those 8 years or whatever it was being worked on in some form. And especially when developing across generations, even though that came later in the cycle. So what role do you think feature creep played in the way the game kind of eventually came out?
I think actually when it was announced as this wonderful open world game with all these wonderful things right from the get-go. So I think from the start they had a very grand vision of what the game would, what they wanted the game to be. And the time they had to work on it, obviously, be it a full team or not a full team working on different stages of the game, it seems like they were still quite far from reaching that initial goal. So with regards to the feature creep, I as big as the game is already, adding more features to that takes the goalpost even further away from them, and they've struggled to reach their initial statement as it is. I'm sure things have changed along. A game that's in production for that long, things will change from the platform to what's possible to the tech through advancements here and there. But they literally have struggled to deliver the game that they initially conceived. So adding more features, I don't even know where you go with that.
What do you think, Annie?
It's very difficult because like being on the other side of things, like feature creep doesn't happen because like someone is being bad or incompetent. It's just people being very excited to do something really, really cool. And I find like especially fans often forget that like studios, like the games industry in particular, is one of those that's filled with people that want to be in games because they're in love in games, compared to industries. So it's one of those things that we need to be a little bit more gentle towards and understand that's happening because people are really, really excited to make a really, really cool game for the fans. And the other side of feature creep as well is like no one wants to be the person in the room that starts saying like, no, we can't make this. No, no one wants to be that person. So there is obviously ways to manage that.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, we should try to be a little bit more kinder towards game devs. Please.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think in all this, it's important to remember that no one sets out to make a bad game. So and that's certainly not what they set out to do. But it's like I said, I've been in sort of that kind of situation where you just add features and then the sort of the boss will come in and it's like, all right, the client has asked for this, we're going to add this thing in now, so you got to add that now. So there you go.
The number of times I've talked to someone and they've gone, oh, this would be really cool if you had this in your game. Yeah. And you think, actually, no, that would be cool. Let's see what we can do about that. And then, it's very easy for features to slip in and just run away from you. Definitely. And you're stuck to a schedule. You've got a certain budget to deal with. You've got a marketing budget that you've put into place. You've paid for marketing time slots, be it on TV or on billboards and things like that. So you've got a schedule to keep to. And ideally, it's your producer whose job is to keep you on track and keep those features at bay, as it were, or keep them for the next update or for the next version. And it comes down to managing the team correctly and getting the game out on time, which is not easy to say the least.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so my last Cyberpunk question for this segment is that, speaking of time, it was delayed a couple times or 3 times, 2 times. I'm going to go say 2 times in 2020 before it did come out. So when it did come out, people then say game should have been delayed. I wonder, and we'll talk about this a bit more in terms of fan expectations, I wonder if fans would have even allowed for like another year of development. What do you think? No.
I think knowing what happened,
yeah,
like it's sort of hindsight is 2020. It's the
literally
knowing what would have happened. If you ask those fans who are the most demanding now, they would say yes. If you ask them then, they would say no. It's the when you asking these people, and the thing is that even if they did delay it, it would take a hit, obviously, to stockholders' expectations. I mean, there's a lot of financial,
of course.
A lot of financial weight that comes with delaying something that for an extra year. However, yeah, I totally think they should have done that. I think they should have, and that's coming from someone who's not a developer. I wish they had, because I do think that, as far as I know, everyone who talks about it is like, the bones of this game are really good. It's just that it's basically like completely like it's like clothes hanging off a skeleton in terms of like, the bones are great and they've dressed it,
yes.
But there needs to be something else like that is like interconnecting it to make it the game that it should have been,
Yeah.
But yeah, people would say yeah, totally now, but like back then they would have been upset, but they also would have bought the game almost definitely.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. Quang, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, obviously with hindsight, it makes sense that game needed to be delayed. But when you delay a game for a certain amount of time, people get obviously very antsy about it, and then they want their game. And then when you keep delaying the game, like as a developer, I would happily delay every single game I make to bring it to a certain standard, because it's your reputation, it's your game. I think Miyamoto says it, a bad game released early is always bad, whereas a bad game can become good if you work on it longer. So yes, in hindsight it makes sense to do that, but as I was saying earlier about marketing windows and stuff, they've paid tons of money to hype the game for this release window, and if you don't release that time, the company, the publishers, the investors take a huge hit financially. And then we talk about how much games costs, and if you delay it by another year, does the cost of the game actually cover the year's delay? Possibly not.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, so yeah, we're going to get into all of that in part 2 of our panel. We're going to talk more about the fan media expectations, the balance between quality and quantity in video games. That's coming in part 2 later in the live stream. Let us know what you think in the chat or in our Discord, especially if you've played Cyberpunk, especially if you played Cyberpunk on Stadia. We have a friend for you. So let us know. And also the extended version of this panel will be released on the mayamada YouTube after the event. So we will see you in just a bit. Hey there, I'm Nigel from mayamada. Thanks for watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other great videos we have on the channel. You can also join the GamePad Discord and check out the next event at GamePad.events. We'll see you soon.